Midnight is a scary time. There are things that we do not understand that happen at midnight, and even more scary, the fact that there are things that we don't know are happening at midnight. It was a surprise to me when I went out to my car this morning and realized that in the night someone had ransacked it. There was nothing really in the car, nothing, we don't steal car radios anymore, so, but the thought that somebody had been in the car going through things that really put me in a state this morning, just knowing that I had not locked a door and I had left myself vulnerable. And when I didn't call 911 because the last thing I need is another police call to my neighborhood. But and there was really nothing to call about. And maybe you have never had to call 911. I've had to do it a number of times. And anybody who has called 911 anywhere in the country knows what the dispatcher says. 911, what is the nature of your emergency? And sometimes you see stories about people who call 911 for absolutely ridiculous reasons. A woman who was mad that her husband would not eat the dinner that she had prepared for him. A man who was upset that his sports team was losing. A woman who was upset that her drug dealer had shorted her. A young woman who thought that the police officer who had stopped at her neighbor's house was boyfriend material and wanted him to come back to her house. Or the drive-through customer at Burger King who felt that Burger King did not actually let them have it their way. What is the nature of your emergency? That's a good question for us to ask ourselves when we find ourselves in crisis. Are we having an emergency, or are we wanting to have it our way? Are we having an emergency, or are we having drama? I like this parable, the parable of the friend at midnight. You can find it only in the Gospel of Luke. And this parable follows Jesus teaching the Lord's Prayer to the disciples, so we know that prayer is important. This parable is also called the importunate neighbor, which means the neighbor who keeps praying and asking for something. So the parable teaches us that it's important to continue praying, and then after the parable, we are told to continue to ask for everything that we need in prayer, to persevere in prayer. And most of the time, I really like the NRSV version translation that we use here, but the preceding version of this particular parable I like better, the RSV. It's actually more relevant to us, and I think it's more faithful to the Greek text. The RSV opens this story with, "Which of you has a friend? Will go to him at midnight and say to him, 'Friend, lend me 3 loaves, for a friend of mine has arrived on a journey and I have nothing to set before him.' Which of you has a friend who would knock on your door at midnight?" Strange things happen at midnight. It is midnight in the parable, and it is also midnight in some of our lives, and it is also midnight in the world. The darkness of our midnight, the security of our midnight is interrupted by a loud banging on the door. What is the nature of your emergency? Which of you has a neighbor who would knock on your door at midnight? At this house in Fort Wayne, I have a neighbor who has become somewhat famous for having disturbances in the middle of the night. Loud disturbances, dangerous disturbances sometimes, loud enough that they wake up my house and every other house in the neighborhood. Sometimes loud enough that a lot of patrol cars end up at the house at 2 or 3 in the morning. And even though it rattles me and I lose a night's sleep, most of the time the drama is at their house. At my last house, though, in Connorsville, I had a really nice elderly lady as my neighbor. She was so nice that she would throw pancakes over the privacy fence for my dogs. It took me 2 years to figure out why my dogs would always go crazy when I heard her back door. And when we got Shy, and Liz's cat ran away because Shy didn't understand "don't eat me" in cat language, the cat only went as far away as the back porch where he sat and glared at us until we moved. Now, this lady was a really nice neighbor, but her granddaughter who lived with her, her granddaughter's boyfriend was scary. Much like my neighbors across the street here in Fort Wayne, it seemed that they would break up every Friday and get back together every Saturday, and their favorite time to do this was right after midnight. Once this boyfriend went from banging on her door, shouting, "Well, I'll just sum up, let me in," to banging on what I was pretty sure was my front door because he was so out of it. And I laid there in bed thinking, oh, no, 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 go away. Do not bang on the glass. It's antique and it will break. And please, please, please just go away. And there was no way that I was going to turn on the lights and go downstairs and answer the door in my pajamas when I knew that it was a guy who was so drunk that he was banging on the door of the wrong house. But in Jesus' time, I couldn't do that. According to their ethics, according to their laws of hospitalities, according to their manners, that would be terribly rude for me to ignore someone knocking at the door. And if the guy knocking at my door asked me for all of my groceries, I wouldn't be able to mutter under my breath and suggest to him that he walk down to the 24-hour convenience store. Because in Jesus' time, everybody baked their own bread or bought it in the market during, obviously, baking hours. And so they would know that I would have bread. I guess in Bible days, I might have even been able to bake, and you all could have come over and had some bread that I baked. That was the custom, to serve fresh bread to people who came to your house. Now, I know that you would not fault me for not answering the door in Connorsville when the crazy guy was banging on it. I know that you would not fault me for not going across the street and asking if everybody was okay when somebody was shouting that they were going to kill someone. In fact, I think most of you would advise me to make sure that my door was locked, and I called 911. Which of you has a friend who would knock on your door at midnight? Strange things can happen at midnight. The darkness of our midnight is interrupted by a loud knock. What is the nature of our emergency? Which of you has a friend who would knock on your door at midnight? We, the church, are the neighbor. We are snuggled in bed with freshly washed sheets, with the pillows just like we like them, with a glass of milk next to the table, or water if you prefer. And I know a couple of you have stuffed animals. We are snuggled in our beds, perhaps with our dogs or our cats. We are comfortable. We are content. We are waiting out this midnight that we find ourselves in, content and comfortable in a world that is full of chaos and terror. And there is a knock at the door, disrupting our sleep. And that knock is the world calling us out. In the darkness of the world, in the chaos of our time, in the terror of battles and ideals and politics, the world knocks on our door. And when the neighbor knocked on the door in the parable, the man inside replied, "Don't bother me. I am already locked up, and we are already tucked comfortably in our bed. I cannot get up to get you anything." At what time has the church in history been that neighbor who wouldn't get up? Or maybe, at what time in history has the church been that neighbor who finally did get up, but too late? Considering just the disciples of Christ, for example, our denomination, along with many other mainline churches, we did very little to oppose slavery. And it was over a century later that we finally acknowledged our sin, our joint sin, and asked for forgiveness. The disciples of Christ and the allied churches as a whole, all of the Church of Christ, almost, regarding the Holocaust, did too little, too late. And it was only after the atrocity that we realized that the prevailing theology of anti-Semitism that we taught in our churches had made us all too complicit in the horrors of the Holocaust. How often in the history of the church, in the present of the church, has someone knocked on the door and been told, "No, thank you. We're comfortable with the way that things are"? How many people have been turned away from church because they were on the wrong side of a locked door? How many people have walked away hungry because other people were too comfortable? How many people have been told to come back later, to wait for a better time to present their agenda, to wait for a better time to voice their plea for justice and equality? And we all know that when somebody comes knocking on your door trying to sell something and you say, "Come back later," you really mean, "Come back never." How many times have we been inside of the church and heard the knock out there and been afraid to open it? Maybe we are afraid of conflict with the person outside of the door. Maybe we are afraid of it being somebody's drunk grandchild's boyfriend. But more often than not, the conflict that we're afraid of is conflict behind the locked door. Sometimes you've got something going on and someone says, "I think we need to go out there." And somebody else says, "Oh, we can't go out there." For whatever reason, for fear, for a reason of not wanting to change, people want to stay comfortable. And you know, when we are afraid to open the door, the midnight lasts longer and the darkness is deeper. But in the parable, the man continues to knock. "Get up. Let us in. Come out. Help us." 911. What is the nature of your emergency? Midnight is a time when strange things happen. We are scared. We are disoriented. We are unaware of terror that is right next to us. We are often called out of our comfort. And at times we are called into emergency situations and we put ourselves at risk. But one thing that we know about midnight is that the dawn will come. And with the dawn comes hope and safety in a new day.